A visitor waited in darkness, but not alone. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Tell me where you're listening from. Your comments always bring this community to life. I truly enjoy reading everyone. Let's step inside. I'll say this for Nero Wolfe. If you want to get his attention, you don't have to shoot anyone, steal the orchids, or threaten to outlaw beer in New York State. You just have to sit in his front room in the dark and decline to explain why. It was a Thursday, which meant the usual. At 9 o'clock in the evening, Wolfe was in the office chair he pretends is a throne. I was at my desk pretending to sort the mail instead of reading the sports section, and the brownstone was behaving itself. Quiet, orderly, and self-respecting. Fritz had gone down to the basement to tangle with some experiment involving goose fat and juniper berries, which I was politely ignoring until it showed up on a plate. I had just finished a paragraph about a short stop who was better with his mouth than his glove when the doorbell rang. "Confound it," Wolfe muttered. That was fair. Anything that made a sound not generated by him, me, Fritz, the orchids, or the radio after 9 p.m. qualified as an outrage. "I'll risk my immortal soul," I told him. "It might be the governor with a full pardon for us both." Fey. Wolfe shut his eyes again, which meant the conversation was closed until I made it interesting. I went out to the hall, flipped on the light, and opened the door. Our caller was tall enough to make me not feel cheated, wearing a dark overcoat and a hat with a brim that had seen better steam. The coat was good quality, too heavy for the temperature, and carried faint whiffs of tobacco and cologne that retail for more than I charge for a day's work. The hat brim was low, the chin under it was tight. "Mr. Goodwin?" he asked. "That's me," I said. "We're not buying encyclopedias this month, but if you have a special on sins of the world, I can buzz you in." He glanced past me into the hall, a quick sweep like he was checking for a sniper behind the coat rack. "I have an appointment." "You don't say. With who?" "Nero Wolfe." He said it flat, no build-up, but the way he packed his jaw around the name told me two things. One, he'd practiced that line on the way over. Two, he wasn't sure it was going to work. "We're fresh out of appointments," I said. "We sometimes keep a few in the icebox, but they thaw badly. However, we are accepting auditions." "Name?" He hesitated just long enough for my eyebrows to get restless. "Dane," he said finally. "Lionel Dane." "Please. I won't take long." Yeah, they never do. "Come on in, Mr. Dane. Wipe your feet. We're sentimental about the rug." He stepped in, still doing that quiet survey of every angle. The hallway light caught a well-cut profile, a nose that had met life head-on, and a pair of eyes that were taking notes faster than mine. He was in his 40s, I'd have said. The overcoat covered most of the rest, but the way it hung told me there was nothing soft underneath. I shut the door and led him into the front room, hitting the light out of habit. He flinched, almost too fast for the naked eye. "If you don't mind," he said sharply, "leave it off." "The light?" I glanced at the perfectly innocent lamp. "She's shy but harmless." "Please." He had lowered his voice, but the edge was still there. "If we can speak in the dark, just for a few minutes." Well, that rang a small bell. I've had folks want to whisper, stand near the window, stand far from the window, sit with their back to the wall, and once a guy insisted on talking while pacing in a circle like he was winding himself up. But asking to sit in the dark in Nero Wolfe's house, that one was new. "Look," I told him, "our electricity bill is already lower than Wolfe's blood pressure, and believe me, that's an achievement. You have to give me more than please to sell turning lights off on purpose." He looked at me then, fully, as if making up his mind about something that wasn't my haircut. "I'm being followed," he said. "Watched. I'm not paranoid, Mr. Goodwin. I appreciate that you're thinking it." "I was thinking it," I admitted, "but only until you said it out loud. That moves you into a higher price bracket. Who's watching you?" "I don't know. That is part of the problem. His fingers tightened on the brim of his hat. If I'm wrong, I'm a fool. If I'm right, I'm in danger, and anyone I speak to openly becomes a target. That was the kind of line that usually goes with a gun under the coat or a body in the trunk. He didn't smell like homicide, though. He smelled like stress and expensive bar soap. "I'll make you a deal," I said. "You go in and sit in the dark if you like. I'll warn Wolfe we're running a special on mystery guests. He doesn't like surprises, even if they're housebroken." "Thank you." He let out a breath that told me he had been holding it since the curb. I walked him to the office door, opened it, and stuck my head in first. "Client," I announced. Breathing, vertical, nervous. "Wants to play peekaboo with the light switch." Wolfe opened his eyes. They traveled from my face to the silhouette in the doorway, and stayed there. "No," he said. "Wrong answer," I told him. "Try again. This one has a name and probably money." "No to the darkness," Wolfe clarified impatiently. "If he wants sanctuary from photons, he can find a cave. Turn the light on, Archie." Dane stiffened behind me. "Mr. Wolfe, if you just—" "Sir." Wolfe's tone cut through the room like Fritz sharpening a knife. "You are a stranger. You seek entrance to my house and my attention. Both are privileges, not entitlements. I will not grant them on terms I find distasteful. If your nerves are unequal to illumination, you may go." Dane didn't leave. I heard the breath again, this time dragged in slowly and let out measured, like he was putting on a face he kept in reserve. "Very well," he said. "Turn it on, Mr. Goodwin." I did, and the office sprang into being. Wolfe in his oversized chair behind the desk, with his 1/7 of a ton arranged in layers of brown and yellow fabric. The globe, the books, the safe, the red leather chair that has seen more trouble than any psychiatrist's couch. My desk off to the side. And now Lionel Dane, hat in hand, stepping cautiously into the zone. Wolfe inspected him as he would inspect a cut of beef. "Name?" he asked, although I'd already given it to him. Wolfe likes to hear things for himself. "Lionel Dane." "Occupation?" Dane hesitated. "Consultant." "That," Wolfe said, "is not an occupation. It is a habit. Specify." "Strategic communications. I advise firms and individuals on messaging, public posture, that kind of thing." "A flatterer for hire. Very well, sit down." Dane sat in the red leather chair. He didn't sink into it like most people on their first try. He perched. That told me his muscles hadn't gotten the memo that we were indoors. Wolfe steepled his fingers. "You tell my assistant that you are watched," he said. "You object to light, as if afraid to be seen. Explain why you believe yourself important enough to merit surveillance." Dane's lips twitched. "Do you always begin by insulting the client, Mr. Wolfe?" "Always," Wolfe said. "It saves time. If you find it intolerable, we are done." Dane studied him for a beat. Whatever he saw, there was enough to keep him planted. "I'm on the board of the Colonnade Foundation," he said. "You may have heard of it." Wolfe's brows tugged together. "A charitable organization," he said slowly. "Urban redevelopment, scholarships, and so on. Among other things, yes." Dane's tone shifted, turning polished, as if he was on a stage he recognized. "We manage a portfolio of grants and partnership programs. Our public profile is substantial. We have donors whose names get printed in bold and critics who accuse us of social engineering." "And your role?" Wolfe prodded. "I craft and manage the Foundation's public image," Dane said. "I've done it for 8 years. We're about to launch the largest initiative in our history, a citywide education and housing project. The announcement is scheduled for next week." "That explains why you employ watchers," Wolfe said dryly. "You are bored and crave drama." "I don't employ them." Dane's control slipped a fraction. "Someone else does. We have a leak, Mr. Wolfe. Sensitive documents have gone missing. Proposals, internal evaluations, donor notes. Only copies, never originals. But the pattern is clear. They vanish from our private files, and within days reporters call with questions they have no business asking. Reporters, Wolfe observed, rarely need an excuse to ask impertinent questions. These aren't random, Dane insisted. They're aimed. Stories appear that undercut certain proposals, cast doubt on specific board members, hint at misallocation of funds. They're not outright accusations, but suggestions, implications, the sort that spread quietly and stick. Smears, I put in. Shaped like questions. I've seen that movie. Yes. Dane glanced at me gratefully, then back at Wolfe. Someone is sabotaging us from inside, and in the last month I've noticed things. A car that always seems to be parked across from my apartment when I leave. Faces I recognize at different events, never quite looking at me. A man on the subway 3 times in 1 week, at different hours and on different lines. If you deal in perception long enough, Mr. Wolfe, you know when you're the one being studied. Wolfe's eyes had narrowed to slits. That's interest, in case you're keeping score. You are certain the documents are not being mishandled by you or your staff? I'm certain, Dane said quietly. I've changed passwords, rotated staff assignments, moved files between offices without telling anyone but my assistant. The pattern continues. And your assistant, Wolfe asked, is impeccably loyal, I suppose. I wouldn't bet my life on anyone's loyalty, Dane said, but I have fewer doubts about her than about most of the board. Names, Wolfe commanded, of the board members and executive staff with access to these documents. Dane reached into his coat. I watched his hand like it might try something exciting, but it came out with a folded sheet of paper which he passed across the desk. Wolfe took it between thumb and forefinger, like it was a subpoena. I leaned over. The list had 6 names. 1. Lionel Dane, Director, Strategic Communications. 2. Miriam Colonnade, Founder and Chair. 3. Edward Vaughan, Chief Financial Officer. 4. Dr. Helena Ortiz, Program Director. 5. Russell Russ, Keene, Operations Manager. 6. Amy Frey, Executive Assistant to Director of Communications. Those are the ones with full access to my division's files, Dane said. There are others with partial access. But if you want to start with a circle, that's it. I want nothing of the kind, Wolfe grumbled. I want bed. Tomorrow morning I want orchids. Then I want lunch. After that, if the gods are malevolent, I may want your troubles. For that, I will require compensation. Dane's jaw set. I can pay your fee. He named a figure that would have made my socks sit up and salute. Wolfe didn't even blink. He never does. He says it encourages people. Why? He asked. Do you come to me instead of the police? This isn't a crime in the legal sense, Dane said. Not yet. The documents aren't stolen, merely copied. No funds are missing. No one has been assaulted. If I go to the police, I'll be told it's an internal matter. And the moment word gets out that the Colonnade Foundation is investigating leaks, we become the story. There's a worse problem, I said. If your mole hears about it, they go to ground. Exactly. Dane turned to me. I need discretion, professional discretion. Everyone else in my world talks for a living. I need someone whose reputation rests on not talking until it's too late for anyone to duck. Wolfe shifted, which for him is like another man vaulting a fence. You believe, he said, that the leaks, the articles, the watchers, all of it, is aimed at you personally. Yes. Why? Because, Dane said, and here something passed over his face. Shame, anger, regret, maybe all 3. I am the one who built the public image they're trying to destroy. If they can discredit me, they can discredit the project. And if they discredit the project, they can kill it before it starts. And who, Wolfe murmured, would want to kill such a noble enterprise? Pick a motive, Dane said bitterly. Politics, money, ego. We're taking control of contracts some people assumed were theirs. We're changing zoning plans, influencing development. threatening existing arrangements. There are plenty of people who would rather see nothing change at all. Oh, I don't doubt you have enemies, Wolfe said. A man who manipulates public opinion earns them as surely as a moneylender earns interest. The question is whether one of those enemies sits at your table. I'm sure of it, Dane replied. I just don't know which one, or which two. We let that sit. The brownstone is good at silence when it has to be. Outside, a car went by and the sound leaked in through the double glass as a faint hiss. "And the darkness?" Wolfe asked at last. Dane looked down at his hands. They were steady now, lying palm up on his knees. 3 nights ago, he said, someone broke into my apartment. I sat up a millimeter. You tell the super? Yes. They claimed it must have been my imagination. Nothing was taken, nothing broken, but someone had been there. The books on my desk had been moved, a glass I'd left in the sink was clean and back in the cupboard. The dimmer switch on the living room light was turned all the way down. Whoever it was wanted me to know they'd been there, but not the police. Just me. That's cute, I said. Very subtle. If you're going to rattle a guy, that's a feminine touch. Not necessarily, Wolfe said. Some men also prefer finesse, though there are not many in this barbarous century. Since then, Dane continued, I've found the lights in my hall off when I know I left them on. The blinds adjusted, the smallest things. And you see watchers, Wolfe concluded, and come here wanting to sit in the dark. Yes, Dane said. I didn't like the idea of walking under a bright window when I don't know who might be watching the house. It's irrational. It is not irrational, Wolfe said. It is merely futile. If you are watched, your coming here will be noted whether or not a lamp is lit in this room. Mr. Goodwin's presence is itself a signpost. However, your impulse to minimize exposure is understandable. Dane's shoulders slumped a fraction. You could see the tension of the past few weeks carving lines into his neck. Will you take the case, Mr. Wolfe? He asked quietly. I'm not exaggerating the stakes. If this project fails, it will not be my reputation that pays the price. It will be thousands of people who were promised homes, schools, stability. That's not melodrama. It's math. We have contracts and projections to prove it. Wolfe's eyes slid shut again. If you don't know him, you might think that meant he'd checked out. I know better. When Nero Wolfe closes his eyes while someone is talking, it's the same as a hawk folding its wings before it drops. No, he said. Dane went rigid. No, not on those terms, Wolfe continued. You have appealed to my, what shall I call it, civic conscience. It exists, but it is not the lever to move me. I do not like cities. I detest crowds. I have no wish to involve myself in the redemption of mankind. Puis. Then what terms? Archie, Wolfe said, ignoring him. Did you note the list? I did, I said. I can recite 2, but it's extra. We will require dossiers, Wolfe went on. Background, finances, recent activities, known associations, on all 6. Dane stared. Then you'll do it. I have not said so, Wolfe snapped. I'm considering whether to accept the risk. Risk? Dane echoed. What risk? There's no violence here. You really think that? I asked him. You have somebody breaking into your apartment to wash your dishes and nudge your dimmer switch. They don't sound like a Boy Scout. If we start poking into their business, we're next on the dishwashing list. I do not fear violence, Wolfe said, which was true since he delegates it. The risk is to my comfort. You have already disturbed my evening. Further disturbances will follow. There will be people here. They will talk. They will fidget. You can charge me double, Dane said hoarsely. Triple. Bah. Wolfe opened his eyes again and locked on to him. Money is necessary, but it is not sufficient. You may be a fool, Mr. Dane, but you are not an uninteresting one. You wield words as weapons, and now you find yourself under linguistic attack. The symmetry intrigues me. Also, he grimaced, You have brought the threat into your dwelling. That is objectionable." "My dwelling?" Dane repeated blankly. "He means ours," I translated. "You showing up here means whoever's playing with your dimmer switches might decide to take a shine to this address." "Yes," Wolfe agreed sourly. "That is intolerable." "Very well. I will undertake to identify your saboteur and the employer of your watchers. You will pay my fee, you will obey my instructions precisely, and you will divulge every pertinent fact, including those you would prefer to keep to yourself. If you prevaricate, withhold, or embroider, I will drop you like a rancid truffle. Is that understood?" Dane swallowed. "Yes." "Good. Archie." "Present," I said. "You will tomorrow visit Mr. Dane's office at the Colonnade Foundation. You will observe his colleagues, his staff, and the general tenor of the place. You will obtain copies of all documents that have been leaked or compromised, with dates and a record of their custody. You will, with Mr. Dane's aid, compile preliminary dossiers on the 6 persons named and return here by 3 o'clock. "Yes, sir," I said. "And if they ask who I am?" "Tell them the truth," Wolfe said. "Truth is often the most disarming lie." Dane stood, still clutching his hat. Some of the fear had drained out of him, leaving something harder behind. Anger, maybe, or determination. "Thank you," he said. "I can't tell you what this means." "Don't," Wolfe said. "Save your rhetoric for your donors. For me, silence is preferable. One more thing. Henceforth, you will not come here unannounced at night. You will telephone first. I will not have strangers materializing in my rooms after dark like wraiths." Dane almost smiled. "Understood." He hesitated. "If I see anything between now and tomorrow, call me," Wolfe said. "Not the police, not your board, not your assistant, me. And keep your lights on," I added. Dane glanced at me. "You think that will help?" "No," I said. "But whoever's watching you already knows your face. No point in helping them sprain their eyesight." He left a retainer check that would keep Fritz in imported delicacies for a while, shook my hand with a grip that had finally stopped trembling, and let himself be escorted to the door. I watched him go down the steps and along the sidewalk, hat low, shoulders up, disappearing into the city's messy mouth. When I went back to the office, Wolfe had tilted his head back and closed his eyes again. "Well," I said, "we've got someone who likes sitting in the dark, a foundation full of philanthropists with sharp elbows, and a cute little burglar with a flair for interior lighting. That's a start." Wolfe grunted. "The darkness is the least of it," he said. "We have allowed a man into this house who is being hunted. That is an intrusion. We will end it." "And if the hunter comes calling?" I asked. "Then," Wolfe said, opening his eyes just enough to show the gold in them, "we will light the room and see who blinks. Archie Goodwin here, reporting for duty at 9:02 the next morning, holding a cup of Fritz's chicory coffee in one hand and a mental note in the other. If the Colonnade Foundation didn't give me at least one good lead, Wolfe was going to make me regret every minute of my life choices. He didn't say that outright, of course. He simply told me, between mouthfuls of cornmeal muffins, "Get facts," in the tone of a man requesting someone pass the salt, but knowing they'll probably spill it. By 10, I was in a cab headed toward Midtown, with Lionel Dane sitting opposite me looking like a man who'd consulted mirrors all morning, but hadn't liked their opinions. He had swapped last night's overcoat for a navy suit with a knot in the tie that would have impressed a mathematics professor. He kept glancing out the rear window, casually, the way a man checking the weather might, but his hands told a different story. They were clamped on his briefcase like it held classified nuclear codes. "You always travel with that level of personal enthusiasm?" I asked. Dane didn't look at me. "I didn't sleep much." "Then let me cheer you up," I said. "If someone was following us, they'd either be terrible at it or invisible. I'm not seeing anything suspicious. Yet." He gave a small nod. "I don't know whether that's comforting or not." It's the best I've got before lunch. Traffic wasn't behaving, so by the time we reached the Colonnade Foundation's headquarters, a glass mid-rise with the personality of a corporate handshake, we were both ready to get answers or cause a scene. Dane badged us through the lobby, which featured polished marble, abstract art, and enough echo to make a whisper sound like a confession. "Everyone here knows who you are?" I asked. "Oh, yes," he said grimly, "which means they'll know you're here because of me. That's the idea." We took the elevator to the 8th floor. The doors opened onto a clean hallway with frosted glass offices and a smell that could only be described as new money neutral. Dane led me through a set of double doors into the communications wing. "Before you meet anyone," he said quietly, "you should know that morale has been mixed. Not everyone agrees on how the new project should be handled. People arguing about a multi-million-dollar initiative. Shocking." He gave me a sidelong look that said he knew sarcasm when he heard it, but he pushed open the door to his office anyway. Inside, a young woman with auburn hair and cat-eye glasses looked up from her computer. "Mr. Dane, oh." Her eyes flicked to me, bright and quick. "Guest? This is Archie Goodwin," Dane said. "He'll be assisting me today." "Archie?" she echoed, as if trying the name on for size. "I'm Amy Frey." She stood and reached out a hand with a grip that meant business. "If you're consulting for Mr. Dane, I assume that means trouble." "Assume away," I said. "You know anything about missing documents?" Her expression didn't change much, but her shoulders did. A small hitch. If I did, I'd have already told him. Doesn't hurt to check. People lie to bosses all the time. "Not this boss." I gave her a smile that meant we'd circle back. "Mind if I take a look around?" She glanced at Dane, who nodded and went back to her screen. Dane walked me through his office. Sleek, organized, not a paper out of place. Either he cleaned up this morning, or he had the mind of a librarian. In the corner was a locked cabinet built like a miniature bank vault. "That where the missing items used to live?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "Files don't just grow legs and walk out." "Funny thing," I said. "Sometimes they do. If someone carries them, anyone else besides you and Miss Frey have the combination?" "No," which meant either he was lying, she was lying, or someone had hands as talented as Saul Panzer on his worst day. We left his office, and Dane took me down the hall to introduce the rest of the suspects. Edward Vaughan, the CFO, turned out to be a man who looked like he slept in spreadsheets and argued with calculators for fun. His handshake was soft and damp, never a good sign, and his office walls were covered in charts that could have lulled an insomniac to sleep. "I hear you've had some paperwork issues," I said lightly. Vaughan blinked at me as if I'd spoken in Greek. "If there were irregularities in my department, I would know it." He adjusted his tie, which didn't need adjusting. "You are?" "Consulting. That's one word for it." "Well," he cleared his throat, "I assure you, Mr. Goodwin. Mr. Goodwin, our finances are airtight. Any suggestion otherwise is irresponsible." That defensive note sang a little too loud for my taste, so I filed him under. Check again later. Next was Dr. Helena Ortiz, who ran programs and spoke with the crisp confidence of someone used to winning arguments before breakfast. She wore a tailored suit, ideas sharper than her heels, and smiled like she already knew what I wanted. "I assume you're here because of Lionel," she said. "He's been tense lately." "Maybe he lost a crossword puzzle," I said. "Or maybe confidential documents keep escaping their cages." She folded her arms. "If something is happening within this organization, I would prefer transparency. Instead, everyone whispers and speculates. Not productive." "Whispers about who?" She hesitated. "Ask Edward Vaughan." "Already did." Her lips tightened. "Then ask Russ." That was a promising non-answer. Russ Keene was the operations manager, stationed in an office that smelled faintly of old coffee and optimism gone stale. He was early 40s, a bit rumpled, an easy talker who tried too hard to look relaxed. "You the guy Dane brought in?" he asked as I entered. "I'm the guy," I said. "You busy sabotaging multi-million-dollar projects today, or do you have a few minutes?" He barked a laugh. "Buddy, the only thing I sabotage is my sleep schedule. Look, if something's going on around here, I sure don't want any part of it." "Funny," I said. "That makes two of us." He scratched his neck. "People are nervous. Rumors, pressure, deadlines. I keep my head down. Heads that stay down are sometimes hiding something." I filed him next to Vaughn under "more digging." By noon I'd made the rounds, collected impressions, and had enough tension readings to fuel a small science fair. As Dane walked me back toward the elevator, I asked, "Anyone here you'd trust with your apartment keys?" "No," he said, then added, "Maybe Amy." "And the person you'd trust least?" He hesitated long enough to make it art. "Vaughn, maybe Russ. But honestly, it could be any of them." "Terrific," I said. "Wolfe loves a buffet." We stepped into the elevator. As the doors began to close, I caught sight of someone standing by the far wall near the stairwell. A man in a gray suit, watching us with zero attempt at subtlety. As soon as our eyes met, he turned away. "Friend of yours?" I asked Dane. "I've never seen him," Dane murmured. "But that's one of the faces I've noticed lately." "Wonderful," I said. "You're collecting them." The doors shut, ending the moment. I made a note to check building security on my way out. Because whether Lionel Dane realized it or not, the circle around him was tightening, and someone else was tightening it too. The elevator let us out into the lobby with the enthusiasm of a bored usher, and I walked Dane toward the glass doors while my mind sorted suspects like playing cards. Ortiz, sharp, composed, a little too ready to point me in someone else's direction. Vaughn, sweaty, defensive, the kind of man who'd delete his browser history twice. Russ, nervous laughter and a habit of looking at the floor instead of people. Amy, alert, loyal, but not immune to hiding something if she thought it protected Dane. And somewhere in the building, a gray-suited watcher who didn't belong. That list alone made Wolfe's orchids look peaceful by comparison. Before we reached the exit, I veered toward the security desk. Dane looked like he wanted to object, but I silenced him with a raised finger. The guard on duty had a newspaper folded beside him, and the bored posture of a man who'd watched 1,000 people walk in and remembered none. His name tag read Higgins, and the mustache under it said he'd lost an argument with a razor. "Morning," I said, leaning in just enough. "Archie Goodwin, Private Investigation Division of the Colonnade Foundation." It wasn't true, but it sounded better than Nero Wolfe's errand boy. He frowned. "We have security protocols, sir." "Sure," I said. "Let's pretend I followed all of them. Now I need a quick look at yesterday's visitor logs and camera feeds for the 8th floor corridor. Shouldn't take more than 5 minutes. 5 minutes longer than protocol allows." Higgins adjusted the mustache, which didn't help it. "If you need video access, you have to file a request with building management." "Great. I'll do that just as soon as we've wrapped up the investigation that's already underway." "Investigation?" His posture changed half a degree, the maximum shift allowed while still counting as sitting. "Your tenant has a problem," I said quietly. "Information is leaking. Someone may be tailing their staff, and I just spotted a face upstairs that didn't fit. If you want to be left out of the report, let me confirm I'm not imagining things. I don't bite." Higgins glanced at Dane, who gave a stiff nod that meant, "This will hurt me more than it hurts you." The guard sighed, typed something with one finger, and swiveled a monitor slightly toward me. 5 minutes, he grunted. "See? I told Dane. Civility is a dying art, but bribing people with panic still works. The footage from this morning played back in grayscale monotony. Employees walking, chatting, one guy dropping his coffee like it was performance art. Then at 11:37 the camera caught the man I'd noticed. Grey suit, slim build, dark hair, no badge. He lingered near the stairwell, eyes following Dane and me as we passed. "Doesn't work here," Higgins muttered. "I know the regulars." "Did he sign in?" I asked. Flipping through the visitor log took another minute, but the answer was no. No Lionel Dane watchers officially entered the building today. "Terrific," I said. "Someone's ghosting your halls." Dane's jaw tightened. "That's him. That's one of the men I've seen near my building." "Then someone's getting bold," I said. "Or sloppy. Either suits me." I thanked Higgins. He grunted something that might have been, "Don't come back," and walked Dane outside. Midtown was doing its usual imitation of an overcrowded anthill, taxis honking, people weaving, the whole noisy ballet. Dane checked his watch like the city might slow down for him if he timed it right. "I'll head back to Wolfe," I said. "You go to your next meeting." "Yes," he said, though the word sounded like it had a rock strapped to it. "We're reviewing final projections with the zoning committee. If the leak sabotages this too..." "If something pops up," I said, "call. Or before that, stop trying to make decisions alone. You hired Wolfe. You get both of us." Dane gave a tight nod, stepped off the curb, and melted into the traffic like a man walking on thin ice. I hailed a cab and headed back downtown. The ride gave me time to rehearse my report for Wolfe. 6 suspects with motives ranging from political sabotage to petty revenge. Tensions simmering under the foundation's marble floors. An unauthorized observer shadowing Dane's moves, and a locked office that had been raided with no signs of forced entry. Wolfe wouldn't like any of it. He would, however, like the challenge. When I walked into the brownstone at a little past 2, Fritz intercepted me like a benevolent border guard. "Lunch is ready," he said. "Mr. Wolfe insisted you be reminded." Did he now? That's his way of saying he wants his report and wants it before the digestive clock strikes 1. "More or less," Fritz said, smiling faintly. I went into the office. Wolfe was in his chair with his eyes shut. To the untrained observer, that meant he was sleeping. To those who live here, it meant he was listening for the exact moment the door opened so he could pretend not to care. I sat across from him and stacked my notes. "I've brought you the usual: suspects, tension, suspicious strangers, and the possibility that this whole foundation would collapse if someone sneezed too hard." His eyelids lifted a fraction. "Report." So I did. Step by step in order, with no embellishment except where it kept me from falling asleep. I described Vaughan's perspiration quota, Ortiz's composure, Russ's eager-to-please routine, Amy's bright intelligence, the security lapse downstairs, and the grey-suited watcher who seemed to think stalking was a competitive sport. Wolfe listened without moving, without interrupting, and certainly without applauding, though I consider that a flaw in his character. When I finished, he breathed out through his nose. A Wolfe version of a trumpet fanfare. "Someone in that building," he said, "is desperate enough to risk exposure." "Or stupid enough," I said. "It is rarely stupidity," he countered. "Stupidity is erratic. This is deliberate." He steepled his fingers. "Your impressions?" "Ortiz is too polished to show cracks, so she's either clean or better at hiding guilt than anyone else. Vaughan's sweating enough to irrigate a small farm. Russ is either harmless or pretending to be. Amy," I shrugged. "She's smart, loyal to Dane, but loyalty can get messy." Wolfe's eyes sank shut again. "The Watcher? No ID, no badge, no visitor log? And Dane's seen him before?" "That," Wolfe said, "is our next thread. If someone shadows Mr. Dane, they fear what he might discover or who he might speak to. His head tilted slightly. And now he has spoken to us? Meaning they may take interest in us too, I said. Meaning, Wolfe corrected sharply, the brownstone may soon be disturbed again. He didn't say it like a prediction. He said it like a promise. I leaned back in my chair. So what's next? You, he said, will gather full dossiers on each suspect this afternoon. I want their histories, connections, conflicts, and anything that suggests motive. And you? I, Wolfe declared, will invite Mr. Saul Panzer to visit this evening, quietly. Well, that tightened the plot. When Saul shows up, I said, you know we're in deeper water. We are not in water, Wolfe growled. We're in a cesspool, and someone has stirred it with care. He turned his face toward me, eyes half open and sharp. We will not be passive in this, Archie. If someone is watching Mr. Dane, I want to know who is watching them. And just like that, the investigation had shifted. The saboteur wasn't the only one exposed. Now the watchers were being watched. Wolfe didn't waste time once he'd made up his mind about Saul. He picked up the phone with the dramatic reluctance of a man lifting a boulder and dialed the number from memory. I could hear Saul's calm voice on the other end, and Wolfe's reply came in short, concentrated tones. Precise instructions, the kind that leave no room for misunderstanding and even less room for creativity. When Wolfe gives orders to Saul Panzer, they are followed the way the sun follows the horizon. By the time Wolfe hung up, I'd already opened my notebook to a fresh page. Saul coming tonight? I asked. Yes, Wolfe said. He will begin with the Watcher. Glad to hear he's starting easy, I said. Only a guy who mysteriously appears inside secured buildings and follows clients around. A warm-up, really. Wolfe grunted. Saul will manage. Which, to be fair, was true. If Saul ever decided to run for mayor, half the city would vote for him, and the other half would admit it was a reasonable outcome. I spent the next hour compiling what Wolfe wanted. Preliminary dossiers from online records, public filings, social media trails, and a few less legal databases that I pretended I didn't know how to use. Vaughn had bounced between corporate jobs like a man avoiding responsibility. Ortiz had a spotless career record and enough awards to sink a yacht. Russ had gone through 3 jobs in 4 years before landing at Colonnade. Amy's history was short but stellar. Internships, recommendations, volunteer programs, the works. By the time Fritz called us in for dinner, I had a thick stack of notes and the beginnings of a headache. We ate quietly. Or rather, Wolfe ate quietly. I tried to explain that a man under surveillance inside his own office building was the sort of detail you don't want bouncing around your skull while cutting into roast chicken, but Wolfe informed me that a trained mind compartmentalizes. I told him mine had been trained in public school, which earned me a very disappointed stare. After dinner, Wolfe returned to the office to digest in silence. I took the opportunity to call Dane and get an update. He picked up on the second ring, sounding like he'd swallowed something brittle. How'd the meeting go? I asked. Contentious, he said. Tense. Vaughn contradicted himself twice. Ortiz was icy, Russ kept pacing, and... He stopped, breath catching. I'm not certain, but I think I saw the same man again, near the building across the street, watching the entrance. And you didn't call me? I said. I couldn't slip out without drawing attention. He lowered his voice. Archie, this is getting worse. Yeah, I said, and that means it's getting closer to being solved. He didn't laugh. I didn't blame him. After I hung up, I went back to the office just as the doorbell rang. That, Wolfe said, eyes still closed, will be Mr. Panzer. I opened the door, and there he was. Saul Panzer, the best detective in New York if you ignore the one giving me orders on a daily basis. Saul was as calm as always. Dark suit, quiet shoes, eyes that missed nothing and judged even less. He stepped inside with a nod. "Good evening, Archie." "Good evening to you," I said. "You're just in time. Wolfe is in rare form. Then it must be important." Saul followed me into the office, where Wolfe finally opened his eyes fully. "You understand the task," Wolfe said without preamble. "I do," Saul replied. A grey-suited man around 40, slim build, dark hair, seen inside the Colonnade building, unlogged, watching Mr. Dane. Possible repeat sightings near his residence. "Correct," Wolfe said. "Find him, discreetly, and discover who employs him." "Will do," Saul said. "Anything else?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "If he shows signs of being dangerous, withdraw." Saul's eyebrow rose slightly. "You don't usually worry about that." "I don't want the man frightened," Wolfe said. "Not yet." That "yet" gave me a chill. Wolfe rarely aimed for psychological warfare unless he was sure he'd use it. Saul nodded once. "I'll start tonight." He left without fanfare, as usual, and the moment the door clicked behind him, Wolfe sank deeper into his chair. "It will not take him long," he murmured. "When he returns, we will have our first solid thread. And until then..." "Until then," Wolfe said, "you will continue compiling dossiers, and you will call Mr. Dane again before midnight." Because, Wolfe said irritably, "I'm concerned someone will attempt to speak with him before Saul intervenes, and because Mr. Dane is nervous enough to do something foolish." I checked the clock. "You think someone might approach him tonight?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that the watcher is not watching idly. If he has realized that Mr. Dane sought help, he may decide to accelerate whatever plan is underway. We must get ahead of that." Before I could respond, the phone rang again. Wolfe flicked his hand at me. "Goodwin," I answered. A shaky breath came through the line. "Not Dane." A woman. "Mr. Goodwin?" she whispered. "Yes. Who's calling?" It's Amy Frey." I straightened. "What's wrong?" "I'm sorry to call," she said breathlessly. "I didn't know who else to reach. Something just happened at the office. You should come. Now." "What happened?" I pressed. Someone broke into the communications suite. Files everywhere. Mr. Vaughan found it 20 minutes ago and..." She sucked in a painful breath. "Archie, my desk was searched, completely turned over." I felt Wolfe watching me as I stood. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, I said. "Hurry," she whispered. "Please." The line went dead. I put the phone down. Wolfe was already lifting his brows, waiting. "Well?" he asked. "Someone just escalated," I said. "Amy's office was torn apart." "Pfui," Wolfe muttered. "Predictable and inconvenient." "Should I head over?" "Yes," he said. "Immediately. And Archie..." "Yeah?" "Observe everyone, especially Mr. Vaughan. He may have found more than he intended." I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. The game was changing. Someone inside the Foundation had moved from subtle sabotage to outright intrusion, and whoever did it wasn't hiding their hand anymore. The cab ride back to the Colonnade Foundation felt shorter than the one that morning, though that might have been because the driver drove like he had a personal vendetta against red lights. By the time I climbed out onto the sidewalk, the building looked different. Not in structure, but in pulse. Something had happened inside, and the air outside had already learned of it. I badged in with the pass Dane had lent me, and the security guard on duty wasn't Higgins. This one was younger, alert, and clearly trying hard to look like he wasn't paying attention to me. "Back again?" he asked. "Trouble doesn't make appointments," I said. "Which floor?" "8th. They're waiting." Waiting. That word never meant anything pleasant. The elevator opened onto a hallway full of tension. Lights a little too bright, voices a little too hushed. People clustered near doors, but pretended they weren't. When I stepped into the communication suite, the scene hit me square in the gut. Amy Frey's workspace looked like a filing cabinet had detonated. Papers covered the floor in messy spirals. Her drawers were yanked out and dumped. A box of sticky notes had bounced across the room like confetti at a very sad parade. Her chair was overturned, and her keyboard lay sideways, one key missing like a knocked-out tooth. Amy stood near her desk with her arms wrapped around herself, pale under the office fluorescence. She looked up as I entered, relief and fear wrestling for space on her face. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Sure," I said, stepping around the debris. "I prefer the place tidy, but I've seen messier." "This isn't funny." Her voice cracked. "I know," I said gently. "Start from the beginning." Before she could respond, Edward Vaughn appeared behind her, blotting out half the doorway like an anxious eclipse. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, clasping his hands as if praying to the god of plausible deniability. "Terrible business, absolutely terrible." "Terrible enough to leave fingerprints," I said. "You call the police?" he stammered. No. We thought perhaps Mr. Dane should be consulted first." "Mr. Dane is heading for a breakdown if this keeps up," I said. "So let's cut the choreography. Who found the place like this?" "I did," Vaughn said. "I came in to look for a budget memo, and I saw everything in disarray." "You touch anything?" "No," he said too fast. "Of course not." Amy stepped forward, clasping her arms tighter. "It wasn't like this when I left. I stayed late organizing the grant proposals, then went home around 8. Everything was normal. So someone broke in between 8 p.m. and... When? A little before 10, Vaughn said. I came back for a spreadsheet I forgot. I looked at him carefully. Sweat trickled near his temple, as reliable as a wall clock. "Convenient." Excuse me," Vaughn sputtered. "Never mind," I said. "Who else has access to this office?" Amy hesitated, eyes flicking toward the door. "Me, Mr. Dane, and... Anyone with a key card?" I pressed. "Yes," she admitted, "but only management." "Which means Ortiz, Russ, and you," I said, pointing at Vaughn. He recoiled as if I'd accused him of setting fire to the Constitution. "I assure you I would never—" Someone cleared their throat behind us. Dr. Helena Ortiz stepped inside with the poise of a woman entering a courtroom where she expected to win. "I just received a message about the break-in," she said. "My office is aware. What exactly happened?" "Someone tore through Amy's desk like they were digging for buried treasure," I said. "Treasure?" Ortiz repeated. "Information," I corrected. "Any idea what they wanted?" Amy swallowed hard. "The donor correspondence folder was in my top drawer. Now it's gone." That landed like a silent bomb. Donor correspondence could mean anything. Private communications, promises, complaints, secrets people paid money to bury. Ortiz's eyes sharpened. "Gone?" "Yes," Amy whispered. "Completely." Vaughn started muttering syllables, trying on panic like an ill-fitting coat. We must alert the board. This is catastrophic." "Relax," I said. "Panicking is my job. You stick to sweating." Amy's face pinched. "Archie, why would they take that? The donor lists aren't public, but they aren't worth stealing. Not unless someone wants leverage." "That's the idea," I said. "Leverage, pressure, blackmail, sabotage. Take your pick." I crouched near the strewn papers and sifted through them. Whoever did this wasn't clumsy. They were controlled. Drawers removed cleanly, items dumped in tidy arcs, nothing broken that didn't need to be. This wasn't vandalism. It was a search with intention. I stood. "Let me guess," I said. "Nothing else missing?" Amy nodded. "So they knew exactly what they came for." Ortiz crossed her arms. "Mr. Goodwin, I hope you're not implying internal involvement without proof." "Lady," I said, "I'm implying everything without proof until I get proof. That's the job." A few desks away, Russ Keene appeared, red-faced and out of breath, like he'd run the length of the building. "Is it true?" he asked. "Someone broke in." "True as taxes," I said, and the thief didn't even leave us a thank-you note. Russ looked around, panic flickering behind the effort to look calm. "This is bad, very bad." "Yeah," I said. "And you're out of breath. Where were you running from?" "Nowhere. I just heard and came as fast as I could." "Uh-huh," I said. "Convenient timing all around tonight." Before he could argue, my phone buzzed. Not Wolfe. Saul. I stepped aside and answered. "Yeah?" "Archie," Saul's quiet voice said. "Update." "Let's hear it." "The Watcher. I've got an ID." My pulse kicked up. "Already?" "Already," Saul said. "Name's Matthew Kearns. Freelance investigator. Works quiet contracts, no criminal record. Tails people for a living." "Who's he working for?" I asked. "That's the question." Saul paused, and in Saul's speak, that meant something worse was coming. "Because he's made 3 calls tonight, one to a number registered to Vaughn's home, one to a burner phone, and one to the Colonnade Foundation's administrative line." "Who answered the line?" "Ortiz," Saul said. I looked back at Dr. Helena Ortiz, a still figure beside a wrecked desk, arms folded, face smooth as porcelain. "Stay on him," I said, "and don't spook him." "I won't." I ended the call and took a deep breath. The pieces had begun shifting, quietly, deliberately, dangerously. Someone inside the Foundation wasn't just leaking information. Someone was hiring watchers. Someone was stealing donor secrets. Someone was accelerating their plan. And from the look of things, the hour for being subtle had officially ended. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and let my eyes settle on Ortiz for a beat too long. She noticed, people like her always do, sharp minds with sharper instincts, attuned to shifts in the air the way a cat senses earthquakes. She didn't speak, but her chin lifted just enough to broadcast that she was aware something new had entered the scene, and she wasn't sure she liked it. Before I could begin nudging the truth out of her, Amy touched my sleeve. "Archie, what happens now?" "Now," I said, keeping my voice low, "we stop pretending this is just an office prank gone wrong." Vaughn's eyes darted between us. "If you know something, Mr. Goodwin, you absolutely must—" "I don't know anything," I said, "but I'm starting to know who's nervous." That shut him up, though his breathing suggested the rest of him hadn't gotten the memo. Russ cleared his throat, looking more jittery than a man drinking espresso through a fire hose. "Maybe this is about the housing initiative," he said. "We've had pushback, political pressure. Maybe someone wants to tank it." "Then they'd leak information," I said. "'Cause doubt, stir rumors, start fires. But this—" I gestured toward the overturned drawer and scattered pages. "This is different. This is someone digging for something specific." "And they found it," Amy whispered. "The missing donor folder. The one item stolen with surgical precision." Ortiz took a slow step forward, her heels clicking like punctuation marks. "Mr. Goodwin, if you have any indication of who might be responsible, it would be irresponsible not to share it. We need to protect the Foundation." "You're worried about the Foundation," I said. "Not about Amy." Her lips tightened. "Of course I'm concerned for her." "You didn't ask her if she's all right." That landed harder than I expected. Russ looked at her, blinking. Vaughn stared at the carpet. Amy's cheeks colored. Ortiz didn't flinch, but a faint crease formed above her brow. Forgive me if my priorities seem misaligned, but this Foundation employs hundreds of people and serves thousands. We cannot allow hysteria to dictate our actions." "Hysteria?" Amy echoed. "I only mean, you meant exactly what you said," I interrupted. Her eyes snapped to mine, and the temperature dropped 3 degrees. "You're here as an observer, Mr. Goodwin, not an interrogator." "Funny thing," I said. "Interrogating is part of observing." The trick is knowing which questions matter. She took another step. Closer now, close enough that her perfume drifted like a clean blade. Then ask your questions, and make them count. I didn't get the chance. The elevator dinged, and Lionel Dane stepped out into the hall, his face paler than a ghost on a detox cleanse. He hurried toward us as soon as he saw the disarray. "Amy," he breathed, "are you hurt?" "No," she said, "just shaken." He exhaled shakily, then turned to me. I came as soon as she called. "Archie, who did this?" "Someone who knew what they were looking for," I said. "Someone who wanted donor correspondence badly enough to risk being caught." Ortiz folded her arms again. "You make it sound as if you already have a suspect." "I have several," I said. "You included?" She stiffened. Dane's head snapped toward me. "Helena, you think—" "I think," I said, "someone in this office hired a private investigator to tail you, Lionel. And that same someone has now switched to a bolder tactic." The room went silent. When silence gets dense. Enough, even the hum of overhead lights sounds accusatory. Vaughn's voice cracked the quiet. "You can't possibly be implying—" "I'm not implying," I said. "I'm stating. Someone hired a watcher, and he's in communication with at least 2 people in this building." Dane looked from me to each of the suspects in turn, his eyes wide and wounded. "Why would anyone here, anyone I work with, spy on me?" "That's the question," I said, "and we're going to find out. Starting now." I walked to the door and leaned against the frame. Nobody leaves. Nobody calls anyone. Nobody so much as sneezes until I give Wolfe an update. Russ swallowed audibly. "Wolfe?" "Yeah," I said. "Nero Wolfe. He's the reason I'm here instead of the NYPD." Vaughn struggled to keep his voice steady. "I don't appreciate being treated like a criminal." "Then stop acting like one," I said. "Where were you between 8 and 10 tonight?" His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. "I told you, I came back for a spreadsheet." "Alone?" "Of course alone." "Funny thing about people who lie," I said. "They always use more words than they need." Amy put a hand to her mouth, watching Vaughn like she'd never really looked at him before. Ortiz's voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Goodwin, if you believe Edward is responsible, say so plainly." "Believe," I said. "I don't believe anything. Belief is Wolfe's natural enemy. I deal in evidence." "And what evidence do you have?" she asked. I let a slow second pass. "Someone," I said, "called your office line from the watcher's phone tonight." Her eyes narrowed. "And who told you that?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She understood exactly what it meant. I turned back to the group. This break-in wasn't random. It was designed to provoke, to escalate, to make Dane panic and make you all react. "Why?" Russ asked quietly. "Why escalate now?" I met Dane's eyes. "Because you came to Wolfe. And whoever's behind this realized it." He went pale again. Amy tightened her grip on her arms. Ortiz inhaled slowly, measuring every molecule of air. Vaughn's sweat ratcheted up a level. Russ stared at the floor like it might offer him sanctuary. "This," I said, "is the moment Wolfe calls a chessboard. Someone just made a risky move." "And the next move?" Dane whispered. "Next," I said, "we tighten the circle. Nobody outside this room learns what happened tonight. Not the board, not the police, and especially not whoever hired that watcher." Amy's voice trembled. "But isn't that dangerous?" "Absolutely," I said. "But it's the only way to flush out the person who's been playing shadow games." My phone buzzed again. "Wolfe," I answered. "Goodwin." His voice came cool and deep. "Return immediately." "Busy here?" I said. "We had a—" I said. "Immediately," Wolfe repeated, in the tone used for lost causes and insolent vegetables. "Saul has a development." That made my pulse skip. "A big one?" I asked. "A decisive one." He hung up. I turned to the group. "I'll be back." Dane grabbed my arm. "Archie, I know," I said. "Stay put. Stay quiet. Trust no one." I didn't add, including each other. They already knew. As I stepped into the elevator, I felt the shift in the air. Something had broken open tonight, and Wolfe had just found the piece that didn't fit. When Wolfe says immediately, you don't stop for coffee, contemplation, or common sense. You move. So I moved, straight out of the building, down the sidewalk, and into a cab whose suspension begged for retirement. The whole ride back, the city blurred like it wanted to warn me but couldn't find the words. I'd left 5 suspects simmering in a room full of suspicion, 1 missing donor file, and a watcher who had suddenly developed a talent for dialing colleagues like old friends. Now Wolfe had a decisive development, which in Wolfe speak meant something had either clicked neatly into place or exploded quietly enough to be interesting. When I stepped into the brownstone's hallway, the place felt different. Calm but expectant, like a theater right before the curtain rises. I hung my coat, went into the office, and found Wolfe in his chair with a look that told me something had pierced his comfortable layer of philosophical detachment. Saul Panzer sat opposite him, legs crossed, hands relaxed, face unreadable, which meant, of course, that he knew something dramatic and was containing it like a gentleman. Wolfe opened his eyes fully as I entered. "Close the door, Archie." I did. "All right," I said. "What's the decisive bit?" Saul gave a small nod. Kearns, the watcher, made a 4th call. "4th?" I asked. "Who this time? Vaughan? Ortiz again? Russ? Amy?" Saul shook his head. "No. A number registered to a private line at the Colonnade Foundation. One that isn't listed, isn't shared, and isn't part of the organization's internal directory." I frowned. "Secret hotline? For what? Donors with stage fright?" "Not quite," Saul said. "That line rings in a locked office, the office of Miriam Colonnade." I blinked. That name carried weight. Founder, patron, philanthropist extraordinaire. A woman whose face appeared in newspapers next to ribbon cuttings, charity galas, and education initiatives. The guiding force behind the entire foundation. "You're telling me," I said slowly, "that the person tailing Dane is calling the founder of the entire operation?" "Yes," Saul said. 3 calls tonight, 1 more earlier this week." Wolfe made a sound that could charitably be described as an exhalation, but more accurately resembled a bear deciding to tolerate civilization for 1 more day. "We are missing a piece," he said, "and I dislike missing pieces." I paced to the desk. Why would Miriam Colonnade get calls from the watcher? She's not even in the building most days. "Because she's orchestrating something," Wolfe said. "That's one possibility," Saul added. "Another, someone is using her line." "That's the more troubling possibility," Wolfe said. "If someone inside the foundation has access to the founder's private number, they have both opportunity and impudence." "So either Miriam Colonnade is behind the sabotage," I said, "or someone close to her is using her name as cover." "Yes," Saul said, "and there's more. I checked Kearns' financials." "Don't tell me he's being paid in soup coupons," I said. "Not quite," Saul replied. "His payments come through a shell company, Bluewell Consulting." I froze. "You're kidding." "No," Saul said. "And you've heard that name before." "Bluewell Consulting," Wolfe repeated. "The group lobbying against the Colonnade Foundation's housing initiative." "Exactly," Saul said. "They've been applying political pressure, filing nuisance challenges, leaking concerns to the press. And now they're paying the watcher." I rubbed my forehead. So the outside opposition hired someone to tail Dane, and someone inside the foundation is talking to the watcher. "That," Wolfe said, "is the fulcrum, the intersection between external sabotage and internal treachery." "Okay," I said. "But what about the break-in tonight? That wasn't subtle. That felt personal." Wolfe folded his hands over his stomach, because it was. Someone inside realized that their previous methods, quiet leaks, watchers, whispers, were no longer sufficient. Your presence at the Foundation changed the equilibrium. You're saying the break-in was a reaction to me? I asked. Yes, Wolfe said. A premature one. The thief took a risk. Now they will be cautious again. That tells us they will make a second mistake soon. I sat. So what's our next move? Wolfe closed his eyes, thinking. Saul waited. I waited. The orchids upstairs probably waited. Finally, Wolfe said, "We invite Miriam Colonnade here." I stared. Invite? As in, to talk? Yes, Wolfe said. Tonight or tomorrow morning, before anyone can warn her or speak for her. Why? I asked. Because she's central to this, Wolfe said, either directly or indirectly, and to proceed, I need clarity on her role. Saul nodded. I can arrange transport, quietly. Do so, Wolfe said. And before you leave, your assessment? Saul considered. The Watcher is loyal to the contract, not the contractor. He won't run unless spooked. I can tail him, intercept him, or simply follow him to his next meeting. Wolfe nodded. Do that, but do not confront him yet. Saul stood. I'll call when I have something. He left as quietly as he'd arrived. The room settled. Wolfe breathed in, then out, like a man centering himself before eating something distasteful, like a potato chip. All right, I said. Let's talk details. What do I tell the Foundation tonight? You tell them nothing of what Saul discovered, Wolfe said. Not yet. And you ensure they remain at the building for the next hour. Why? Because, Wolfe said. If one of them receives a call or message, I want to know who reacts. Mr. Dane should be told to observe carefully. Got it, I said. And Miriam Colonnade. I will speak with her myself. I stood. Anything else before I go? Keep the suspects from ripping each other apart? Yes, Wolfe said. 2 things. Shoot. First, he said, do not allow Miss Frey to leave your sight. She may know something she doesn't realize she knows. And second, Wolfe opened his eyes fully, fixing me with a look that carried weight. Be cautious, Archie. This saboteur is no longer playing games. They have begun to fear discovery. And people who are afraid, I said, do stupid things. Yes, Wolfe murmured. Very. I grabbed my coat again. This time the brownstone's silence didn't feel expectant. It felt like the moment before a storm breaks. The cab dropped me back at the Colonnade Foundation with a jolt that reminded me I should have written my will earlier in life. I stepped out onto the sidewalk, scanned the building for anything that resembled a watcher or a worried conscience, and headed inside. The same young guard sat at the desk, but this time his eyes snapped directly to me like he'd been told to expect turbulence. They're still up there, he said before I asked. Good, I replied. Don't let anyone sign out without my say-so. He hesitated. That might be above my pay grade. Then consider it a bonus project, I said, and walked toward the elevator before he could reason his way out of it. The ride up was a silent crawl, the kind that gives you too much time to think. Saul's revelation about the calls to Miriam Colonnade's private line had rearranged the entire landscape, like finding out the river you'd been following was actually a moat. Suddenly, everyone inside the Foundation had a shadow behind them. Everyone had motive, or the faint outline of one. And the break-in, that messy but precise rummage through Amy's desk, no longer felt like an isolated escalation. It felt like a signal flare. The elevator doors opened onto a scene that hadn't softened since I left. Vaughn was pacing in circles like a man practicing for a guilt marathon. Russ sat on the edge of a desk, elbows on knees, eyes unfocused. Ortiz stood apart from them, hands clasped before her, posture rigid as a church statue. Amy was near her desk, having put the room back in some semblance of order, though every folder she touched looked like it, carried a bruise. And Dane had changed. He was upright, yet hollowed out, as if someone had scooped something essential out of him while I was gone. The strain around his eyes hadn't faded. It had deepened. He looked at me the second I stepped in. "Archie, tell me you know something." "I do," I said, "but not what you want to hear." Vaughn stopped pacing. "What does that mean?" "It means everyone stays put," I said. "Wolfe's orders." "That man doesn't run this foundation," Ortiz said. "No," I said, "but he does run me, and right now I'm the only one who can keep this circus from turning into a full-blown stampede." Russ stood, hands lifted in surrender. "Fine. Nobody's going anywhere. Now what?" I walked farther into the room and took a slow, practiced look at each face. People hate silence. It invites their brains to confess things their mouths won't. Vaughn shifted from foot to foot. Ortiz held steady. Russ scratched the back of his neck 3 times in exactly the same place. Amy met my eyes only briefly before looking down. "Wolfe wants all of you accounted for the next hour," I said. "An hour?" Vaughn squeaked. "What is he doing in that hour?" "Thinking," I said, "which is more than some people here have done recently." Dane ran a hand through his hair. "Archie, please. I need to understand what's happening." I took a breath. No sugarcoating, not when the clock was ticking. "Your watcher, the guy tailing you, he's talking to someone inside this foundation, someone with access to a private line, someone who wants information and doesn't care how they get it." A ripple of tension moved through the group. "Who?" Ortiz asked. "If I knew, I wouldn't be standing here," I said. "But Wolfe has a theory, and I'm willing to bet the next person to twitch gives me my first real lead." Nobody twitched, which told me someone was trying very hard not to. Dane moved toward me and lowered his voice. "Archie, could it be Miriam?" "Could," I said. "But that's Wolfe's to decide, not mine. He wants to talk to her." "What? When?" "Soon, probably tonight." The shock on Dane's face looked genuine. "She's been distant lately, hard to reach. I assumed it was stress." "Stress doesn't hire private investigators," I said, "or steal donor files." Amy wrapped her arms around herself again. "Archie, if someone is using Miriam's line, they're high up," I said. "Close enough to her office to act without raising alarms, which narrows the list." Vaughn let out a sound halfway between a scoff and a whimper. "This is madness. I've dedicated 8 years to this place." "Sabotage comes from dedication too," I said, "twisted in just the right way." Ortiz spoke next, voice measured. "Mr. Goodwin, we cannot simply wait in this room while some unknown party manipulates events. We need to confront Miriam directly." "And what if the person manipulating events is standing next to you?" I asked. Her eyes flickered. Only a fraction, but enough. I pressed on. "Nobody leaves until Wolfe says so, and while we wait, you're all going to tell me exactly where you were between 8 and 10 tonight in order, without interruption and without embellishment. If someone lies, I'll know." Russ groaned. "This is ridiculous." "Ridiculous," I said, "is a man breaking into an office he shouldn't access, stealing a file only a handful of people know about, and calling the founder's private line all in the same night. Ridiculous is someone watching Dane from rooftops and subway platforms while pretending to care about organizational stability." I let my gaze sweep across them. "Ridiculous," I said, "is thinking Wolfe won't spot the weak link the moment he walks in." "Walks in?" Vaughn sputtered. "He's coming here." "He might," I said. "Or he might send someone else. Either way, the truth is about to get very uncomfortable for somebody." That bought me another few seconds of blessed silence, just long enough for my phone to buzz again. "Wolfe," I answered. "Yes?" "Bring Mr. Dane here immediately," Wolfe said, without the others. I blinked. You want him alone? Why? Because, Wolfe said, Miriam Colonnade has arrived early, and she insists on speaking to him, alone. Dane overheard enough to blanch. I covered the receiver and looked him in the eye. That's your cue. Let's go. What about? Amy began. You stay here, I said. All of you. Nobody moves until I'm back. I guided Dane out. Behind us, 5 people watched the door close with 5 different kinds of fear. In the elevator, Dane swallowed hard. Archie, why would she come tonight? You wanted answers, I said. Wolfe is about to give you some. As the elevator descended, he whispered, and what if the answer is worse than I imagined? I didn't tell him the truth, that it almost always is. I didn't have to. He could see it in my face. When the doors opened to the lobby, I stepped out first and scanned the street. The brownstone was waiting, and inside it, Wolfe and Miriam Colonnade were already circling each other. By the time Dane and I reached the brownstone, the air outside had the tight, expectant stillness of a held breath. I unlocked the door, ushered him in, and could feel the tension rolling off him like heat. Dane wasn't a man who rattled easily. His entire job was built on polished composure, but this was different. This was dread. Fritz met us in the hall, stiff as a sentry. Mr. Wolfe is waiting in the office, he said, and the lady is with him. The lady. Fritz didn't need to say her name. His tone carried enough reverence to confirm it. Dane wiped his palms on his coat. Archie, is she angry? She's breathing, talking, and upright, I said. That's all I've got. Once you're in the room, it's between you, Wolfe, and her conscience. Which, if my instincts were right, was under considerable strain. I opened the office door. Miriam Colonnade stood near the center of the room, her back straight, her gloved hands folded neatly around a clutch bag the color of old ivory. She was in her 60s, elegant, without vanity, her silver hair swept into a knot that belonged at the head of a boardroom or a political fundraiser. She looked like someone who had spent a lifetime being listened to. Wolfe remained in his chair, his eyes half open, hands tented. The sight would have given lesser people vertigo, knowing they were about to be dissected by a man who rarely budged an inch. When Miriam saw Dane enter, her expression changed, not softening but tightening with something like sorrow. Lionel, she said, voice low and controlled. Sit down. He obeyed as if she'd been issuing him orders since childhood. I took my usual station at my desk. Miriam gave me a passing look, measuring, assessing, deciding I was either irrelevant or inconvenient, but returned her attention to the 2 men who mattered. Wolfe let a beat pass, long enough for Miriam to notice the silence was intentional. Madam, Wolfe said finally, you wish to speak to Mr. Dane. I did. She looked at Dane with a steadiness that made him shrink slightly in his chair. Lionel, you've forced my hand. I don't understand, he said. Why are you here now? Tonight? Because your situation has escalated far beyond office politics, she replied. And because you have brought Mr. Wolfe into the matter, which means the window for discretion is closing rapidly. Convenient timing, Wolfe observed dryly. You choose to appear just as your organization is sinking into disarray. That is precisely why I'm here, she said sharply, to keep it from collapsing further. Wolfe's brows lifted a millimeter. For him, that qualified as applause. Then let us dispense with equivocation. Madame, someone inside your foundation has been leaking documents. Someone hired a private investigator to observe Mr. Dane. Someone has now stolen confidential donor files. And, most pertinently, the watcher has placed multiple calls to a number registered specifically to your private office. Dane's head snapped toward her as though he'd been struck. Miriam didn't flinch. Yes, I know. The room chilled. Dane's voice dropped an octave. You know. I know that someone has used my private line, she said. I discovered the irregularity this morning. And you didn't tell anyone? Dane whispered. No, she said, because I do not know who has access, and because I will not ignite a scandal without proof. Proof, Wolfe said, is precisely what we intend to obtain. She turned to him, her chin lifting fractionally. I respect your reputation, Mr. Wolfe. You are known for discretion and precision, but you must understand something. The foundation is delicate. Our projects depend on perception. If this becomes public— Pfui, Wolfe snapped. Do not insult me with public relations peblum. You're here because you fear something far more personal. Her jaw locked, but she didn't deny it. Dane leaned forward. Miriam, who would have access to your private line? Only your assistant has the number. Former assistant, she corrected quietly. She retired last month. Then who? Dane pressed. Only the board? No, she said. Not the entire board, just 3 members. She hesitated. Myself, Edward Vaughan, and Elena Ortiz. That hit the air like a thrown stone. Even Wolfe sat up half an inch. I whistled under my breath. So the thief's circle just got a whole lot smaller. Dane looked sick. Edward, Helena. But why would either of them— That is what we will determine, Wolfe said. Madame, what prompted you to come here tonight? Miriam drew a slow breath. Because the calls to my line weren't the only thing I discovered. Wolfe narrowed his eyes. She reached into her clutch and removed a folded paper, handing it to me. I brought it to Wolfe. He unfolded it with his thumb and forefinger. It was a copy of the donor correspondence folder. Not the original, but a photocopy, a clean one, labeled, annotated, and at the bottom was a handwritten note. We need to talk. Tonight. No signature. Wolfe tapped the page once. So the thief is toying with you. No, Miriam said quietly. The thief is warning me. Dane stared. Warning you of what? That someone intends to use the Foundation's donor data to discredit us. Her voice wavered for the first time. And me? Blackmail, I asked. No, she said. A coup. A silence settled thick as plaster dust. Wolfe spoke slowly. Explain. Miriam clasped her hands. Lionel, I wasn't going to involve you until I understood more, but someone on my board wants to force my resignation, remove me as chair. They've been positioning for it for months, quietly, subtly, undermining trust, questioning my decisions, manipulating staff loyalties. Dane looked shattered. Who? I do not know, she said. But now they've shifted from influence to sabotage, and I believe your communications division is their entry point. The donor file theft, I said. The watcher tailing Dane. The break-in tonight. They're stepping up. Yes, she whispered, because they know I'm beginning to suspect. Wolfe's fingers drummed. This coup, would it benefit Vaughan or Ortiz? Miriam hesitated. Both, but not equally. Dane swallowed. Miriam, you should have told me. No, she said, because I needed you uninvolved. If anyone suspected you were helping me, they would target me, he finished, and they already did. She closed her eyes tightly for a moment. Yes, it fit. It all fit. Too neatly, too snugly, but the shape was right. Someone inside the Foundation, someone with power, was orchestrating a quiet overthrow. Dane had become collateral, or perhaps a necessary casualty. And the Watcher? A tool. The leaks. Pressure points. The break-in. A message. Wolfe sat back. Madame, you have been maneuvered expertly. Someone close to you is eager for your seat. They have used your trust as leverage. I know, she said. I should have seen it sooner. You were not intended to, Wolfe replied. Dane leaned toward her. Miriam, tell me honestly. Do you think it's Vaughan or Ortiz? I don't know, she said. Vaughan is ambitious. Ortiz is brilliant and decisive. Either could do this. Either might believe the Foundation needs new leadership. Or both, Wolfe murmured. The possibility hung there, sour and heavy. What happens now? Miriam asked. Wolfe looked at me. Now, he said, we prepare the trap. Miriam's brows arched. Trap? Yes, Wolfe said. We will summon the board members and senior staff to this house, all of them, tonight or tomorrow morning. They will come because you will insist, and because they believe they still control the narrative. And then? She asked. Then, Wolfe said, I will dismantle that illusion. Dane exhaled shakily. I straightened. So the gathering is happening? Yes, Wolfe said. His eyes glinted with something almost like satisfaction. The moment has come. Miriam nodded once. Gravely, knowingly. Tell me what you need. Wolfe closed his eyes, thinking for half a second. Then he opened them with clarity sharp as a blade. Madam, he said, I will need you to lie. If you've never watched Nero Wolfe arrange people like pieces on a chessboard, you've missed a peculiar kind of theater. All talk, no props, and one fat man who doesn't move but somehow ends up everywhere. It was the next evening, just after 8, when the curtain went up. The office was at full capacity. Wolfe behind his desk, Mountain and Oracle in one. I in my usual chair at the side, notebook ready and shoes polished more than the occasion deserved. Miriam Colonnade on the red leather chair facing Wolfe, straight-backed and self-contained, and ranged along the wall in the spare chairs. The cast, Helena Ortiz, composed and cool as ever. Edward Vaughan, visibly moist. Russ Keene, trying to look smaller than his frame allowed. Amy Frey, eyes bright and anxious. Lionel Dane, pale but focused. Saul Panzer was present too, but you wouldn't have noticed if you didn't know where to look. He occupied the corner behind the globe, quiet and unassuming, like a coat someone forgot to hang. Wolfe let the silence do its opening work. It moved across the room, like a slow fog, getting into the joints. When he finally spoke, nobody had to be told to listen. You all know, he said, why you are here. Not precisely, Ortiz said. We know there have been incidents, but this setting is unusual. It is necessary, Wolfe replied. The brownstone affords privacy. Your building no longer does. Vaughan sniffed, pulling at his collar. We could have handled this internally. You tried, Wolfe said curtly, and failed, repeatedly. He turned slightly toward Miriam. Madam, if you will. She nodded and rose. The room straightened with her. Miriam Colonnade looked at each of them like a teacher about to grade a very disappointing class. I will be brief, she said. Confidential documents have been leaked. Donor data stolen. Lionel has been surveilled. My private line has been misused. All of this points not to an outside enemy, but to an internal betrayal. Someone at Colonnade has been working in concert with our opposition. Russ fidgeted. Opposition meaning Bluewell Consulting. Yes, she said, they have opposed our housing initiative from the start. Their fingerprints are on many of the hostile articles and political maneuvers we've encountered. And now, there is evidence they have a friend inside. Evidence? Vaughan squeaked. What evidence? In due course, Wolfe said. Madam. Miriam took a breath. This was the lie, the one Wolfe had asked for. And if she felt the weight of it, she didn't show it. This afternoon, she said evenly, I was contacted by a man named Matthew Kearns. That got a reaction. Even those who tried not to show it failed a little. He was hired, she continued, to follow Lionel, to observe him, to make him uneasy. He no longer wishes to be part of this arrangement. He has provided me with a record of his instructions. She paused. And the name of the person inside Colonnade who served as his contact. The lie sat there, dressed as truth. I watched the room. Amy froze, fingers tightening around the notebook in her lap. Russ blinked, twice, hard, then stared straight ahead. Ortiz narrowed her eyes, but didn't move. Vaughn! Vaughn's hand went to his pocket and dropped away again, as if it had touched something hot. He swallowed. His gaze flickered, just once, toward the phone on Wolfe's desk. There it was, the first crack. Wolfe saw it. I'd have bet a month's pay. Miriam let the silence linger, then finished the line Wolfe had given her. "I have not yet turned this information over to the authorities," she said, "out of regard for the Foundation's reputation and for the people in this room. Mr. Wolfe has asked for one chance to resolve this internally before we go further." She sat. Wolfe inclined his head. "Thank you, madam." He shifted his attention back to the group. "The situation is not as ambiguous as it appears. The pattern is clear. I will outline it, and then I will name the culprit. You will, of course, be free to deny it. For a while." Vaughn made a small sound, like a cork trying not to pop. Wolfe steepled his fingers. "We begin with motive. The sabotage has not merely threatened the Foundation's work, it has specifically undermined Lionel Dane and Miriam Colonnade. The leaks targeted projects and people associated with them. The Watchers shadowed Mr. Dane. The stolen donor files could be used to discredit her as chair and him as head of communications." He tilted his head. "Why these two? Because together they are the strongest defense the current vision of Colonnade possesses. Remove him, and its public voice falters. Remove her, and its authority fractures. A convenient opening for new leadership." Ortiz lifted her chin slightly. "You're suggesting someone wants Miriam's position." "I'm not suggesting," Wolfe said. "I'm stating. Miriam has confirmed that a move is underway to force her resignation. A coup, she called it. That narrows our field considerably. Among you, who would benefit?" "No one," Russ muttered. "We all—" "Phooey," Wolfe snapped. "Ambition is as common in philanthropy as in gambling. Do not insult me. Both Dr. Ortiz and Mr. Vaughn stand to gain influence, authority, and control over resources if the current chair is removed." Vaughn blanched. That's absurd. I've always supported Miriam." "Have you?" Wolfe said. "Your financial reports have been models of opacity. Your resistance to external audits is a matter of record. And you stand at the intersection of donors, funds, and contracts, where temptation is thickest." Vaughn opened his mouth, closed it again, and mopped his forehead. Wolfe went on. "Now, method. The leaks required access to internal documents from the Communications Division. The initial trespass at Mr. Dane's apartment, the moved objects, the dimmer adjusted, was designed to unsettle, not to steal. Someone wanted him nervous, off balance. When he came to me, that balance shifted. Our involvement forced the saboteur to act more boldly. Hence the break-in at Miss Frey's desk and the theft of the donor correspondence folder." Amy flinched. "Why my desk?" "Because," Wolfe said, "you were the nearest obstacle to Mr. Dane. You are his assistant, his gatekeeper, and emotionally loyal. Hurting your sense of security hurts his, and rifling your drawers while leaving his untouched suggests the target is him, while in fact hiding a different aim." "Which is?" Dane asked hoarsely. "Control of information about donors," Wolfe said. "Who funds which programs, under what conditions, with what expectations. Donor leverage is a weapon. In the wrong hands, it can be used to blackmail, to threaten to withdraw support, to destabilize leadership. Whoever stole that folder intended to use it to manipulate Miriam or discredit her." Miriam's mouth tightened, but she said nothing. "Now we come to the Watchers," Wolfe continued. Saul stood as calmly as if Wolfe had asked him to pass the salt. "The man following Mr. Dane is Matthew Kearns, freelance investigator," he said. "He was hired through a shell company, Bluewell Consulting, to track Lionel's movements and contacts. He's been paid regularly. His phone records show calls over the last week to 3 relevant numbers: Mr. Vaughan's home, the main administrative line at Colonnade, where Dr. Ortiz once answered, and a private office line belonging to Miriam Colonnade, to which only Miriam, Mr. Vaughan, and Dr. Ortiz have access. He sat again. The weight of that landed like a brick. Ortiz's eyes flashed. I answered the administrative line because I was in the outer office when it rang. That proves nothing. Indeed, Wolfe said. Your answering a single call is not incriminating. It is incidental, but Mr. Vaughan's connection is not so easily dismissed. There is no professional reason for a private investigator hired by our opposition to call his home. That's a coincidence, Vaughan stammered. Wrong number. Twice, Wolfe inquired. Vaughan faltered. And then, Wolfe went on, there is the misuse of Miriam's private line. It is one thing for Kearns to call and be answered by her once, perhaps twice. It is another for him to call repeatedly, using it as a conduit. Who, among the 3 with access, has both motive to hide communication and the habit of skulking around offices after hours? He turned his eyes fully on Vaughan. You returned to the communication suite at 10 last night, Wolfe said. Alone, you say. You found Miss Frey's desk in chaos. You sounded the alarm. It is a pattern as old as melodrama, the criminal discovering the crime he committed. I didn't. Spare us, Wolfe said. You also have access to the donor records, to Miriam's line, and to financial channels that intersect with Bluewell's shell. Saul has traced money from that entity to an account controlled by an organization you chair on weekends, a civic advisory group with no staff, no projects, and no purpose other than to receive funds. Saul nodded once. Paper trail's clean. Clean, but not invisible. The room tilted. At least, that's how it felt. Russ stared at Vaughan like he'd never seen him before. Amy recoiled. Dane looked sick. Ortiz's expression didn't change much, but something in her eyes did, a mixture of anger and grim recognition. Vaughan sagged into his chair. You can't prove any intent, he whispered. Donors move funds through intermediaries all the time. It's standard practice. It is, Wolfe agreed. But hiring an external lobbying group to undermine your own organization is not. Nor is employing a watcher to tail a colleague and orchestrating a smear campaign through selective leaks, nor breaking into your own office to steal donor records. Together, they form a pattern of deliberate sabotage. Vaughan pressed a hand to his face. You don't understand. If this initiative goes forward as planned, we are exposed. There are irregularities, old arrangements, side agreements. When Miriam pushed for transparency, for restructuring, when Lionel crafted that campaign, Bluewell approached me. They said if I helped slow the project, they'd help manage the fallout. Quietly. No scandal. Just adjustment. You chose your own skin over the work, Miriam said softly. He looked at her, eyes wet. I chose survival. Yours too. If this blew up, they'd come for you as well. I thought, if we could replace you with someone more pragmatic, someone who would help you bury your sins, Wolfe said. Vaughan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Ortiz stepped forward. You fool, she said quietly. If you had come to me and risked you exposing me, he snapped. You've wanted more control for years. I knew exactly what you'd do with that information. She flinched once, then straightened. Miriam, I swear to you, I knew nothing of this. Yes, I have disagreed with you. Yes, I have considered whether leadership needed to change, but I would not destroy the foundation to win an argument. Wolfe sniffed. For once, I'm inclined to believe her. Your plan, Mr. Vaughan, was too clumsy for her. Bluewell suggested Lionel be rattled. Miriam undermined, and you saw a chance to protect yourself and gain leverage. You used Kearns to watch, to intimidate. You fed selective documents to them, trusting they would harm the right people. But when Lionel came to me, you panicked, You escalated prematurely. The break-in was supposed to frighten and remove a weapon, the donor file. But instead it exposed your desperation. Vaughn had stopped wiping sweat. He sat motionless, staring at the carpet. "What happens now?" he asked dully. "Now," Miriam said, voice steady as glass, "you resign. From your position, from the board, from any role connected to Colonnade. We will conduct a full audit. If what we find is merely selfishness, cowardice, and incompetence, perhaps we keep this out of court. If we find more—" She let the rest hang. He laughed once, a broken sound. "You'll ruin me." "You chose that risk yourself," Wolfe said, "when you invited wolves into a house built for shelter." Nobody pointed out the metaphor. There was some more. Details, arrangements, calls to be made and postponed. Saul left to keep one more rendezvous with Mr. Kearns and Bluewell's lawyers, the kind where a quiet word saves everyone years of noisy litigation. Russ and Amy were excused, both looking like they'd aged a decade. Ortiz stayed behind with Miriam and Dane for a private conversation I didn't eavesdrop on, mostly because Wolfe gave me a look that said he'd like to enjoy at least one sausage in his lifetime without having to think about how it was made. Hours later, the brownstone was itself again. Silence smoothed out the edges. The city hummed beyond the walls, polite and distant. Fritz was in the kitchen doing things to veal that should have been illegal in 6 states. Wolfe was in his chair, eyes half closed, savoring the temporary absence of clients. I sat at my desk, feet up, staring at nothing in particular. "You know," I said, "for a guy who claimed he just wanted survival, Vaughn did a good job nearly killing the whole show." "He confused preservation with evasion," Wolfe said. "A common disease. He wished to avoid the consequences of past actions by committing new ones." "Like painting over mold," I said. "The wall looks better for a while, then makes you sick." Crude but apt. I watched him for a beat. "You set that whole theater up with one bluff," I said. Kearns never gave Miriam a name. "He didn't need to," Wolfe said. "The knowledge that he might was sufficient. A guilty man's imagination always outruns reality. And if Vaughn hadn't reacted, then I would have proceeded differently." He opened his eyes a little more. But he did. His glance at the telephone, his hand to his pocket, his pallor, all consistent with a man fearing imminent exposure. Saul's findings corroborated it. I nodded. Miriam took it hard. "She will recover," Wolfe said. "She has work to occupy her. And now the work has a chance to proceed without internal rot." "Lionel?" I asked. "He will reframe the narrative," Wolfe said. "That is his trade. With luck, he will learn that truth is a more stable foundation than cleverness." That was as close as Wolfe got to sounding hopeful. We let the quiet settle again. After a while, I said, "For the record, I'm not crazy about living in a house that shows up on surveillance reports, having watchers lurking outside, waiting to see who comes and goes. That's not exactly my favorite decor." "Then be grateful," Wolfe murmured, "that we took steps to discourage further observation. Saul having a little chat with Kearns. Among other things." I stretched. "Well, at least the lights are staying on. No dimmers mysteriously lowered. No chairs moved 3 inches to the left." "Bah," Wolfe said. "If anyone disrupts the order of this house now, it will be you." "That's comforting in a way," I said. "If I'm going to be rattled, I prefer to do it personally." He closed his eyes again, signaling the conversation was nearing its natural death. I let him drift for a minute, then asked, "One more thing. You actually care about the housing project, or was this purely about keeping the brownstone from being part of someone else's target practice?" He was quiet long enough that I thought he might dodge it. Then he said slowly, "I do not care for cities," he said. "They are noisy, crowded, and often foolish. But I care even less for men who wrap their venality in the language of public good. If one must endure human folly, it should at least be honest. That, I said, is almost immoral. It is a concession to reality, he replied. Morals are for those who believe the world can be made tidy. I know better. I grinned. Sure. And yet somehow you keep helping tidy things. Just enough for dessert. He snorted. Archie. Yes, sir? Turn off the light when you go up, he said. And for heaven's sake, leave the furniture where it is. I did as instructed. The house settled into darkness the way it likes it, entirely on our terms. No watchers at the windows, no hands on the dimmer, no strangers moving things a fraction to the left just to prove they can. Outside, the city kept on scheming. Inside, we let it. The door was locked, the chairs were where they belonged, and in the kitchen Fritz was testing a sauce that would, in the morning, be carefully evaluated and either praised or condemned. In other words, order had been restored, which, in our line of work, is the closest thing to justice you ever really get. Does you ever really get? 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 Does you ever